there's a surprising commonality between why there's so many managers who are incompetent and why we feel stuck in life. And the key to getting unstuck is that commonality, and it all comes from the Peter Principle. This principle is one of the three great findings in the 20th century, along with Murphy's Law and Parkinson's Law. And today we'll talk about what is the Peter Principle and how can we use it to thrive in any environment that we're in. What is the Peter Principle? It's the idea that in a hierarchy, every employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence. Every single one of us at one point in life, we're going to be doing something that we're not good at. And of course, we see this in organizations all the time. Whether it's a big corporation, whether it's a small startup, whether it's management consulting, where I worked at, it's all the same. At the bottom, when you first start your career, it's usually about the hard skills, right? Can you program? Can you analyze companies? It's the technical things that you're doing. But as you progress through, it becomes you need to lead teams, you need to manage projects. And so the nature of the job really changes. Leadership and management, those are soft skills, so to speak. So sometimes it's not taught at all, and when it's taught, it's usually poorly taught. And that's why we have a lot of managers who all of a sudden like to micromanage because they know the hard skills, right? They can make sure those are done perfectly, and that's why they micromanage. Or you have leaders who make their team cover all the ground because they can only make decisions when they've seen all the data out there. Why? Because they were brought up in the bottom-up approach, right? They were doing all of the research in order to bring up the insights. They weren't trained to think in hypothesis-driven way. They weren't trained to think big picture first and let's find the direction.
I think of it like 3 levels. First level is going to be a producer, right? It's someone who's able to create positive business impact through their technical expertise, their influence, and their vision. I think that a lot of times what's lost on people is they think producer, they think, oh, you don't have any power, you don't have any influence. And that's just absolutely absurd and wrong. Some of the best people in my company are absolute producers. They're not leaders and they're not managers, but they are leaders in who they are as a person. The second level to that would be a manager, right? I consider that to be somebody who's responsible for supervising and motivating employees that are in the direction that the business is going. And I think that that is a very important point because Dan, you've probably seen this. You bring in someone that's a manager at one company, you bring them to this company, they're motivating and they're supervising in the wrong direction because maybe it's what the last company wanted them to do. Maybe it's the culture of the old company. And so I think it's really important as a manager, you don't bring those old practices. You have to adapt to the company that you're in. And make sure that you can motivate and supervise people within the constraints of the culture that you're in. And then there's leaders. And that is, when I think of a leader and what's the biggest difference between a leader and a manager, right? And people ask this a lot because I think in our company, we have a decent amount of leaders who are like, or a decent amount of managers who want to know how they can become leaders. And I said, you have to gain more leverage is essentially what it is. And you gain that through rallying people to move toward a vision. You have to become inspirational essentially. Like, I don't think I would have any leader in my company who's not inspirational. Oftentimes people say, well, I'm not a leader. I said, I'm not inspired by you. Like, have you heard, honestly, I'm just like, dude, have you heard yourself talk? Do you see how you show up? Like, it's just not inspirational. And so I think that people kind of, brush those things aside, but it's like, if you can't inspire people, they're not going to want to move in the direction you want them to. So when I think of a manager, I think of someone with 2 hands. When I think of a leader, I think of someone with 10 hands. And that's just kind of the visual that I put in my mind and I tell my team. And then you've got the last level, which I'm not really going to go into depth here, but I think owner, right? Which is Dan, right? You are essentially resource allocator, the person that's ultimately responsible for the results of leaders, managers, and producers. And when I say resource allocator, it's fiscal and human capital. I think a lot of people just think fiscal, but I think the most important is human capital. And I think Dan would be able to speak to that. It's who are you bringing into the business? How are you attracting talent? How are you creating the business into a product that attracts people that want to work there? When I'm hiring someone for a producer position, right, which is, you could call it a high-level individual contributor. And I say high level because I don't want just an individual contributor. I want someone who's a high-level individual contributor, right? The belief is that to lead the way, you must first go the way. And I think that you have to really think about embodying these traits. And when I think of a producer, I think of these 3 that make the triad, which is they're autonomous. Just because you have somebody that is overseeing you doesn't mean you don't manage your own time, you don't set your own goals, you don't manage your own growth plan. You're driven, so you are self-motivated. I think oftentimes we think, how do I motivate people? And what I tell my managers a lot is I think, how would you demotivate somebody and just don't do any of that? A lot of studies have shown you don't motivate people, you just demotivate them. That's what bad managers do. And so the goal is that you find people who are driven and you just let them be driven. And then the third piece to it is industrious, which is doing the hard work. I think that everyone wants to, like, I'm sure Dan, just like me, I want to hire people who are producers who can do the work of 5 people. That's my goal. And so as a producer, that is what it looks like to be fulfilling that role. Now, if you are somebody who is interested in how do I become a higher level contributor? How do I contribute more to the team, add more value, or maybe move up at some point? These are the 3 things that I've seen have debilitated people on my teams from moving up, right? Lack of awareness of their own deficits, which I think that's an obvious one. If you don't know where you're deficient, which it sounds like you guys already did an activity, which is awesome, you can't move up. But the other 2, I think, are the most important, which is because I don't think they're talked about often. The first one being the inability to delay gratification. The second thing is a lack of people and linguistic skills. And I say linguistic because I think language is very important. And I think that the way you speak to people, often the biggest issues that my leaders have right now is they don't know how to communicate something to somebody without offending them or without causing them more conflict. And it's because I don't think that they have studied language. Now, as for managers, what a lot of people see, and what I'm sure you guys have seen other companies that maybe you've been in, is that a lot of people seek management not because they want to serve, but because they want to control. And so that is why fundamentally when I'm looking at somebody for a management position, that's the tagline I put in the job description. It's like management is service, not control. Nobody wants to work for someone that they feel unsafe with. They're not going to be able to be creative, right? So you have to be able to learn how to become the rock for others, right? The second issue is confident, but she wasn't arrogant, and I think that especially in a company that's looking to grow like you guys are this coming year, confidence is being able to say, I haven't done this yet, but based on my track record, I can figure it out. And so when a challenge is presented to you, you're not concerned, you're not wavering, you're, okay, I've not done this, but I've done things similar and I can recall that I have overcome those. And then organized, because I think that oftentimes I have had great managers who have all those aspects and they think, oh, I'll have other people on my team be the organized ones. It's like, no, that's not true. Somebody has to organize all of the people to go in the right direction to align for the business. And I feel like this team is very organized, but I think it's important to point out. That being said, how do you stay stuck in a position, right? And I think that actually this is, in my opinion, this is, going from a producer to a manager or a leader. I think a lot of people know if they want to move out of that role or not. And they kind of go into the role with the intention of, hey, I want to be in this role for a long time, or hey, I do want to move up. But I think the hardest one is actually going from a manager to a leader. And I think that these are the reasons that I've seen why people have not been able to move past a lead or a management position into a true leadership role. And so the first one is being that they stay stuck in the details rather than being able to zoom in and zoom out. And I think this is really relevant because when you're a manager, you're talking to people who are most likely interacting with the vendors or the customers or something at the ground level every day. And so those people every day don't have the perspective that any leadership has because they're in the nitty gritty. You guys know if you're someone that's doing this. And so what seems like a big deal to you might not actually be a big deal to the business. The second piece is that they don't take the time to solve their own problems. I've seen this a lot in management where, especially if they come from companies prior, where there's a lot of red tape and there's a lot of approvals and checks and balances, is that they come into an entrepreneurial company like this or like the one that I run, and they're not able to solve their own problems. And I tell them, I'm like, I didn't hire you to check a box. I hired you to solve a problem that I have. And then the last one is probably the most important in terms of, in order to be a leader and to move out of management, you have to command respect from others. You have to have respect for the team, right? I would never put someone in a leadership position if the team didn't respect them, right? The team can drive a leader out. Is treating your team like employees rather than loyal followers. And then the last level is leader, right? And so I think that this is in one of your core values, Dan, which is the belief of leaders that they grow the team and the team grows the business. I think that's the fundamental belief, because if you've gotten to a level of leadership, most likely you're at a point where you cannot yourself do everything, right? And you can't meticulously even manage it all at a point. You have to oversee it. In looking at what that looks like, I think that in the beginning you asked me the traits that created those people that were able to stick along. And that's why I put the first one here is humility, which I think I already explained. But the other two, I think, are the two most important for longevity, which are empathy and poise. Poise, I would consider, is a kind of confidence you cannot get without experience. So that is why a lot of people, I think, want to move up very quickly and they want to skip all the hard shit to become a leader. And you cannot, because you won't have poise. And so that's why poise is there. It's what you earn in order to become a leader. And then lastly is empathy. I think that empathy comes from an ability to, when you talk to somebody, and this is just the way I like to put it, is you're not on opposite sides of the table. You sit on the same side when you have conversations. And so most importantly, how do you stay stuck at a level of leadership, right? Because especially in this company, I'm sure, based on looking at the org chart and stuff, there's different levels to leadership. I think there's 3 things. And if you're even just looking to improve in the state that you're in as a leader, I think that the first is thinking of, I think it's the mindset switch between, oh, what's the product that we're creating, to my product is my team. If you are the leader and you want to be a leader in this company of, I want to say more than 10 people, right? You have to see your team as the product that creates the other thing. The second piece to it, and I think this is for anyone, especially who's a newer leader, and it looks like we have a lot of new people who could be newer leaders on this call, is that you have a too short of a time horizon. And then the last piece is seeking approval and boosting your ego rather than doing what's right for the company. And I think I kind of hit on this again with your question, Dan, which is, I think a lot of people, once they get to a level in the company, they're so afraid of losing it. And they're so afraid of saying that other people who are newer and have less of a title and who have less experience are right. And they dismiss those opinions. And that is one thing that I'm really lucky that I had mentors in the beginning that were like, never skip past anybody in the decision-making process. Ask frontline, ask managers, ask leaders, ask everyone. Don't ever skip. And it's something that I noticed that I didn't do a good job in the beginning of teaching my leaders. And so I would have people come to me and they're like, this is what we need to do. And I'm like, well, what does Jake and Paul and Mark think? And they're like, I don't know, but they don't really know. I'm like, dude, you're missing all the gold. Like the whole team together, the more people that make a decision, the more people that have input in the decision, the better the decision's outcome is going to be. And there's been studies done on that. So it's making sure that you can put your ego aside and not say, just because I have this title and I have this responsibility, that I have to be right all the time and that I'm the right person for everything and that I'm always the best of these things. I think it's the leaders who are able to be humble enough to admit when maybe their idea isn't right for the company, or maybe they're not right for their role anymore. Those are the best people.
Now, in terms of the characteristics, I'm going to be borrowing this from Warren Buffett, but I think he's a pretty good source, and so I will share with you what he has shared with me personally in our many talks together, right? Is that he looks for intelligence, which I define as, I just niche that down to super relevant experience within and having solved the problem that I'm looking to solve, right? I'm hiring for solutions. I'm not hiring for positions. And I think if we can be very clear about what problem we are trying to solve, we'll be much better at defining the problem, so we get much more clear about the solution. So number one is, he says intelligence. I just define that a little bit more nuanced to have this person solve the problem in a business just like mine. The second is he calls it energy. I call it work ethic, right? And the way that you would judge that for me is, what's the speed of response when we're interacting with this person? If I ask them for something, how quickly do they get it to me? Just general communication style, because we like to move quickly. And I know that if they're not moving quickly during the interview process, I'm not going to expect it to move faster afterwards. That is how I measure that. And then the third is character, right? Which is difficult, right? He says integrity, but just I would say character in general. And the underpinnings of that, which is the fourth piece, is, do they have a long-term perspective? Can they think in longer time horizons? And that's so important, especially as you get leadership positions in, because at each level of the business, you're in the beginning, you're replacing tasks, you're replacing doing, right? And then you're replacing managing, and then you're replacing leadership, and then you're replacing vision, innovation, and decision making. So each of these levels, right, the things that we're replacing become more intangible and harder to find, which is why most people don't succeed and don't scale their businesses, because it's harder to look for leadership, right? But that's like when we're approaching these interviews, we keep it front of mind, which is like, what am I looking for right now? They got on the interview because they have the track record. Okay. The correspondence has been speedy-ish. What I'm really looking for is the character that I think can lead this component in the company, and do they have the teeth to really want to drive, which a lot of people don't.
Got it.
right? And you still
Yeah,
and you
I
still
mean,
get
the
it
big-
wrong. You just have fewer mistakes.